This is Africa News Tonight on the Voice of America.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to VOA Africa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yehiyes Wahib in Washington. Here's what's coming up on Africa News Tonight.
Botswana's Assistant Minister of Health, Setumoli Dadisizwe, told Parliament yesterday that there has been no hospitalization of those found with the new variant.
That's Mokindisi Dube reporting from Gaborone, Botswana. Details coming up. Also, Ethiopia's Prime Minister claims war gains and urges Tigrayan rebels to surrender. And Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo launch joint airstrikes against Islamic militants. These stories and more on African News Tonight. But first, our top story. A medical scientist who worked closely with the team that recently identified the newest COVID-19 variant named Omicron says its appearance is completely expected. Epidemiologist and Professor Salim Abdul Karim, one of the leaders of South Africa's response to the pandemic, warned of the likelihood of a new variant emerging soon in September. Omicron appears to be more transmissible than previous forms of coronavirus, but it is not yet known if it causes more serious illness. Darren Taylor reports.
Karim says he and his fellow scientists working in their labs in the city of eThekwini on South Africa's east coast dedicated themselves to finding the new variant before it caught the world unprepared. He told a virtual news conference they knew it was coming. It was just a matter of what it was going to look like.
So the government invested heavily in developing the genomic infrastructure in order to identify a variant as early as possible, because the earlier you identify it, the more effective you can act against the virus.
The team based at the KwaZulu-Natal Research, Innovation and Sequencing Platform identified Omicron last week, tracing the first case to neighboring Botswana.
This particular variant is concerning. Not very concerning, but quite concerning because it has mutations that overlap with the other 4 variants of concern.
Karim says Omicron's multiple mutations indicate that it may be very infectious and able to escape the body's immune response to a degree.
And that's what's the source of much of the international panic. Will their vaccines protect against this particular variant? We don't know the answer to that question until the studies are completed, and those will take a few weeks.
But he adds, based on the mutations they've seen, he and his colleagues can deduce how Omicron's probably going to behave.
It has mutations that confer a certain level of immune escape from different parts of our immune system, but mostly from the antibodies that we generate from natural infection and from vaccines. So we're expecting that there will be some level of immune escape. It will, in all likelihood, be partial, not full, and in all likelihood, the escape will be more from natural antibodies than from vaccine antibodies. So that's what we are expecting.
So, says Karim, vaccines remain the number one weapon against all variants, Omicron included.
That means that individuals who've been infected naturally in the past, they've had COVID, and they haven't taken a vaccine, they are at probably pretty high risk of getting reinfected. So they should go and get a vaccine quite quickly, because the vaccine together with natural immunity is a very strong protection against pretty much all the variants.
He says current vaccines should offer good protection against getting mild disease, but there may be some cases of mild infection in people who've been vaccinated.
But as far as severe disease and hospitalization is concerned, we're pretty confident, based on what we've seen in the other variants of concern and the way in which T cells protect us, that the vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, should have very high efficacy and maintain that efficacy for severe disease and hospitalization. So we are not likely to see a lot of severe cases and a lot of vaccinated people being hospitalized. But unvaccinated people, they are going to run that risk. In fact, this variant...
Far from Omicron casting doubt on the value of being immunized, Karim emphasizes that the variant should be a wake-up call to the world to get the jab as soon as possible. For VOA News, I'm Darren Taylor in Johannesburg.
Despite incidences of the new highly transmissible Omicron variant of COVID-19 last week, Botswana's cases have remained low. Health officials say there has been no hospitalization due to the new variant, with the infected displaying only mild symptoms. From Gaborone, Botswana, reporter Mokandisi Dube has the details.
Botswana's COVID-19 Task Force Deputy Coordinator Musipili says the disease burden remains under control despite the country recording its first cases of the new Omicron variant last week. On Monday, the country recorded 262 cases of COVID-19 since last week Thursday, 15 of which are of the new variant. Musipili says the numbers indicate the country is still recording below 10 cases per 100,000 people. However, there was a slight increase of 70 in the number of active COVID-19 cases.
The number of COVID-19 active cases as of the 26th stands at 602, a slight increase from 532 in the previous reporting period. Fortunately, most of the country remains green, indicating that all COVID-19 zones have less than 10 cases per 100,000.
In contrast, neighboring South Africa, where Omicron also has been detected, is seeing a spike in new infections. Botswana's Assistant Minister of Health, Situmoli Dadisizwe, told Parliament yesterday that there has been no hospitalization of those found with the new variant. His Superior Minister of Health, Dr. Edwin Tikolodi, says the first 4 people who tested positive for the Omicron variant have since left the country. They were visiting Botswana from an unnamed country.
We continue to expand contact tracing to ensure that we do not leave any potential case undetected. It appears to us that most of the 19 cases so far detected in Botswana are imported.
Despite Botswana maintaining the new variant was imported, Tikolodi refused to state the nationalities of the first 4 diplomats who tested positive for Omicron.
Where the virus originates from is not important. We are not going to be geopoliticizing this virus. What is important is to applaud our scientists who have discovered or found this virus to make the world aware of it so that we can act quicker to reduce the transmission.
Botswana has not announced any new restrictions following the detection of the new variant. For VOA, this is Mkondisi Dube in Gaborone, Botswana.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Sudan's leaders to work rapidly to put the country's democratic transition back on track. Joseph Siegel, Director of Research at Africa Center for Strategic Studies, discussed with VOA senior analyst Mohammed El-Shanawi whether the U.S. carrot and stick approach could help restore the democratic transition and what the international community should do to stop the rising trend of military coups in Africa.
Well, it's a very important point that the military needs international diplomatic recognition and economic support if it's going to sustain itself in power. And so there's a lot of leverage on the part of international actors, especially because Sudan faces major economic challenges stemming from the decades of economic mismanagement under the military. Therefore, the U.S.'s withdrawal of assistance after the coup is very significant. I think we're also seeing a potential calculation on the part of the military that they believe that by reinstating Hamdok as prime minister, that they'll be able to regain all the international support and assistance that was allocated towards Sudan following the start of the transition in 2019. So I think it's very important that the international community considers how their actions will be perceived and that they are clear that any resumption of financial assistance or diplomatic recognition will be contingent on a civilian-led democratic government and not just the promise that there will be a civilian-led democratic transition. Otherwise, the international community risks inadvertently empowering the coup that's taken place.
Judging from a long history of military coups in Sudan, Do you see the agreement between Burhan and Hamdok as a genuine push to restore a democratic transition or an attempt by the military to weather the international and the internal storm?
The military has had a hand in governing Sudan for all but 10 years since Sudan's independence in 1955. And this gets at a core problem that we're seeing in the current negotiation, namely that the military feels entitled to govern in Sudan. So that's the crux of the issue. That's the key obstacle to the democratic transition. The latest move to reinstate Prime Minister Hamdok is really less of a compromise on the part of the military then, and more as an opportunity to try and demonstrate that there will be some civilian support for the military government. But effectively, this will be a military government with a civilian figurehead. And so in that way, it does seem to be more of a ploy on the part of the military to try and diffuse some of the international and domestic opposition that has emerged following the coup, and less of a genuine attempt to really resume support for and movement towards a democratic transition.
From a strategic point of view, if the coup leaders really changed course in Sudan, how could that impact the rising trend of military coups in the African continent?
Well, this is a very significant point, because what happens in Sudan will have implications for other parts of Africa. Every time a coup is recognized, it incentivizes militaries who have political ambitions in other parts of the continent. And it's no coincidence that we have seen an acceleration in the number of coups in Africa over the last couple of years. In Mali, there have been 2 coups, in Guinea, Chad, Tunisia, and prior to that, we saw coups in various forms in Egypt, Algeria, and in Zimbabwe. And it isn't lost on military actors that if coups in some parts of the continent are initially criticized, but then ultimately accepted, that could happen in their countries as well. And so we've definitely seen a major backsliding on this front, and a deterioration in what is accepted in terms of governance norms across the continent. And so very much with regards to Sudan, how the international community responds will have implications. It will be watched closely around the rest of the continent. And if the international community doesn't take a strong stand in Sudan, we will surely see more coups elsewhere in Africa in the coming year.
That was Joseph Siegel, Director of Research at Africa Center for Strategic Studies, speaking with my colleague, Mohammed Al-Shanawi. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, leading military operations at the war front today, urged the Tigrayan rebels to surrender. The French news agency AFP quoted Abiy as saying, "The youth of Tigray are perishing like leaves, and that they are being led by people who do not have a clear plan." Video footage from state media today showed Abiy in uniform with soldiers in what appeared to be the northeastern region of Afar. The area has been the site of fierce fighting in recent weeks as the Tigray People's Liberation Front TPLF rebel group tried to seize control of a highway that supplies the capital Addis Ababa. AFP says on Sunday, state media claimed the Ethiopian army controlled the lowland Afar town of Chifra, and Abiy said today that such gains would be replicated in the Amhara region. A TPLF spokesperson yesterday dismissed Abiy's deployment as a circus. Outside observers are not able to confirm either side's claims. Uganda's armed forces say they have launched joint airstrikes with the Democratic Republic of Congo against Islamist militants that Uganda blames for suicide bombings this month in its capital. Halima Tumani reports from Kampala.
In a tweet Tuesday morning, Ugandan Brigadier General Flavia Byekwaso announced that Ugandan forces, together with Congolese allies, had launched joint air and artillery strikes against camps of the rebel Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF. She confirmed the attack to VOA.
Yes, it's true. There's a joint operation going on this morning on ADF positions.
Ugandan officials blamed the ADF for recent suicide bombings in the capital Kampala that killed 5 people, minus the bombers. The ADF has been fighting the Ugandan government since 1996 and claims affiliation with the Islamic State militant group. Earlier this month, while addressing the country on the security situation, President Yoweri Museveni said they would follow members of the ADF wherever they are. Viekwaso tells VOA that Tuesday's airstrikes in Beni in eastern Congo were Uganda's long-term wish.
This has been a wish actually for both presidents, because ADF is not only a threat to Uganda, but a threat within the region and a threat to DRC itself. I think this has been something that we've been looking for quite some time.
Prior to Tuesday's airstrikes, Museveni said 12 ADF members had been killed and 106 arrested in Uganda since June. Halima Othmani for VOA News, Kampala, Uganda.
The French news agency AFP reports that after months of being held incommunicado, Guinea's deposed President Alpha Condé has been sent to his wife's home. On state TV, the junta said that Condé was now home with his wife. It did not say whether Condé was under house arrest or if he faces other restrictions. Condé led the country for nearly 11 years before his September 5th ouster in a coup. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has demanded the unconditional release of Condé. ECOWAS has suspended Guinea from participation and has called for elections to be held in 6 months. The country's strongman, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, was sworn in as interim president last month. While he has pledged to restore civilian rule after elections, Doumbouya has so far refused to commit to a time frame for the transition. Equatorial Guinea has begun deporting thousands of Cameroonians who were residing in the country illegally, citing national security concerns. Authorities in the capital, Malabo, said the Cameroonians fled conflict in Western Cameroon, where government troops have been fighting Anglophone separatists. Mokirwin Kinzeka reports from Kiosi, a Cameroon border town, where hundreds of those already deported are trying to return to Equatorial Guinea to gather their belongings.
About 40 people in Kiosi, a Cameroonian southern commercial town, want to enter neighboring Equatorial Guinea this Tuesday morning. Among them is Philip Oyonu, a 33-year-old building material shop owner. Oyonu says police in Equatorial Guinea forcefully removed him from his home in the town of Bata. He says he was sent back to Cameroon on November 5 alongside 65 other Cameroonians.
Porter nos plaintes devant le chef de l'État pour qu'il sache que ses enfants sont en détresse.
He says he is pleading that President Paul Biya of Cameroon raises their concerns with President Obiang Nguema of Equatorial Guinea so that authorities can allow undocumented migrants who have been deported to Cameroon to return to Equatorial Guinea and gather their belongings. Oyonu says it is not common for Equatorial Guinea to deport mothers and fathers without their children and merchants without their goods. Government officials in Cameroon's south region say at least 600 Cameroonians have been deported from neighboring Equatorial Guinea in the past months. This week, Cameroon said it had negotiated with Equatorial Guinea to give undocumented migrants 3 months to get residency permits or to voluntarily return to Cameroon. Cameroon's ambassador to Equatorial Guinea, Desiree Jean-Claude Owonomengele, said about 1,000 Cameroonians have opted to voluntarily return. Last week, Nguema Obiang Mange, vice president and son of President Teodoro Obiang Nguema, said concerns about rising theft and banditry are behind Equatorial Guinea's decision to ask undocumented migrants to leave. He spoke on Radio Malabo, Equatorial Guinea's state radio, while addressing a crowd that supports deportation.
A mí me están criticando de que, mira la política de Nguema, ya está expulsando a los extranjeros.
Mange says he is surprised that the decision the government of Equatorial Guinea has taken to deport undocumented migrants is generating controversy and criticism. He says rising insecurity in Equatorial Guinea has pushed President Obiang Nguema to ask all undocumented migrants and those who have criminal records, including violence and theft, to leave. Mange says Equatorial Guinea, like other countries, will not tolerate undocumented migrants. Mange added that legitimate refugees, including those fleeing separatist crisis in Cameroon, will not be affected by the deportations. However, he said some people displaced by the crisis in the Central African Republic and Cameroon prefer to hide within the community and work instead of registering as refugees. In September, Equatorial Guinea announced that it was to deport all undocumented migrants from countries including Nigerians, Cameroonians, Chadians, Central Africans, Ghanaians, and Kenyans. Moki Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News, Kiosi, Southern Cameroon.
From navigating shopping centers to government offices, South Africa's little people say public spaces are not designed to be accessible for them. One advocacy group in Johannesburg is calling for better support to help them live independently. Linda Giftash has the story.
Different, abnormal, and very small. Those are just some of the words Olivia Radebe, who was born with a condition that restricted her growth, says have been used to describe her. The 27-year-old says her late grandmother encouraged her to persevere with her studies and with living independently, and she has. But Radebe says she still faces practical challenges navigating life in Johannesburg.
You cannot ask help and not pay someone, because I'm not on a permanent job, and also the money that I get from the government is not enough to sustain me to that certain level whether I can afford to pay everyone and anyone. It's a bit of a challenge. So in other words, I have to beg someone to help me.
There are hundreds of causes for restricted growth, the most common being achondroplasia, a form of dwarfism that results in short arms and legs. Radebe was never diagnosed as a child. Now, she says it would be too costly to go to a private specialist to find out. Radebe says she sometimes wonders what her underlying health issue is.
Because at a later stage, I might be having other complications. So if I was diagnosed earlier, maybe I would have known that, okay, fine, in 10 years' time, I should expect this, I should live like this. There are certain things that I need to avoid in order for me to have a long life.
Specialized health care isn't evenly available across the country. Parents have to look to big cities like Cape Town and Johannesburg to find the best resources for their children who show signs of restricted growth. Rochelle Peterson is a member of Little People South Africa and has a son with achondroplasia.
Hospitals in areas like impoverished areas where there's a day hospital. So a parent will go and take the child, but the nurses, the doctors are not aware of the condition that the child has.
Raising awareness about people with dwarfism is one of the main reasons why Pete Nell established the nonprofit Short-Statured Persons South Africa.
We can share ideas and come together, and also that the public can know what we are about.
The 57-year-old says he struggled with accessibility and discrimination throughout his life. Nell says the organization gives people like him more power to advocate for themselves and their unique needs.
That's why they say nothing about us without us. You can't talk for us, we must talk for ourselves. Like I say, we must stand together and fight for our rights.
And the country, he says, is starting to listen. Nell's group met with South Africa's Social Development Minister to discuss their health and reproductive needs that go unaddressed. He hopes it will be the first step towards bringing more support within their reach. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
And that wraps up this edition of Africa News Tonight. I'm Yehiz Wahid in Washington. For all the latest developments on the continent 24/7, visit our website at voanews.com. On behalf of our producer, Mokbilia Baro, thank you again for tuning in and choosing the Voice of America.